Great having you here. Thank you so much for your time. There is, of course, a lot going on. Can we begin by talking about the transportation bill?
Sure.
Where does it stand? How much money is Congress, is Washington going to allocate to start in this overdue manner to fix our crumbling roads and bridges?
Well, too little is the short answer, Bruce. If you look at the scale of the problem we have with infrastructure in this country, our roads, our bridges, ports, energy, communications infrastructure, the whole portfolio of infrastructure has been massively underinvested in. It's hurting our citizens. It's diminishing economic growth in this country. It's hurting the competitiveness of our largest companies. The House of Representatives, we approved. I didn't vote for it. I was one of the few people not to support it. The House of Representatives approved a bill that keeps funding at current levels. In other words, they look at the facts, they look at this underinvestment we've had in our infrastructure, and they've decided that kind of baseline or flatline levels of infrastructure funding is what we should be doing. I think that's a terrible outcome. That's what we've done in the House. The Senate has proposed a bill that's slightly higher, but it's still way below what most objective experts believe we need to do. And so now we're in this reconciliation process. There's a bill coming tomorrow that it's kind of a compromise between the two bills. In my opinion, it's still woefully inadequate. It very, very modestly increases our funding in infrastructure. And on an inflation-adjusted basis, it doesn't. But that's where we are now.
So given that we've underinvested in this area for a long time, we've got roads and bridges that are in terrible shape. The Arlington Memorial Bridge, which is a stone's throw and a half from where you are now, from where you and your colleagues work, it's down to 4 lanes. We don't have all 6 lanes because the thing is crumbling. This money creates jobs. It is an economic booster of a very, to a very significant extent. Why not meet the problem with the solution that is commensurate? What is the deal?
So the problem is, I think people agree with those facts that you just laid out, Bruce. I think people understand, not as thorough as they should, but infrastructure is a really good investment, as you said. The problem has been how to pay for this increase in infrastructure investment, right? We've paid for it historically with the gas tax, which we haven't raised in over 20 years. So as a result, the amount of money that comes into the infrastructure fund from the gas tax is only about 60 or 65% of the amount of money that gets paid out. So figuring out ways to fund that gap has been the question. Many people have proposed increasing the gas tax. I've proposed and have built huge bipartisan support for fixing our broken international tax system, where $2 trillion of cash sits overseas, which, by the way, is a problem that is hurting us almost as much as this infrastructure crisis as it relates to diminished economic growth. We proposed fixing that, getting that money back, which would generate additional tax revenues, and allocating those tax revenues towards this gap between the gas tax and the amount of money we need to spend on infrastructure. Under our proposal, we could not only increase the traditional sources of funding for infrastructure, which is the Highway Trust Fund, but we could also create a whole new national infrastructure fund that over time could fund about $1 trillion of additional projects. So our solution matches up well with the problem that you've identified, which, by the way, that problem is also a huge opportunity.
What do you make of companies that move their assets to other nations to avoid American taxation, even as they take advantage of our education system, our road network, our transportation, all the rest of it? This seems to some as unpatriotic. I'm sure the bean counters at these companies see it as a win-win. The smell, I'm not sure it passes the smell test for many, though. What's your view?
So my view is, as you know, Bruce, I ran 2 public companies prior to running for Congress, 2 companies that I started. I would never move my company internationally to lower taxes. I think it's a blessing to be in this country for the citizens, for our corporations, and they ought to pay their fair share. Having said that, we ought to recognize that we're in a global world, and companies are competing globally. And in a free market economy, companies do make these decisions. And right now, the system is so bad, right? What happens is companies both keep their money overseas, and we get almost no tax on the revenues that they earn or the earnings that they produce overseas. And there have been so many solutions put forth to solve this problem that would change the incentives, prevent companies from making these decisions to domicile overseas, would create an environment where literally trillions of dollars could flow back to the United States. And importantly, it would raise revenues because we would be taxing their overseas earnings. And corporate America is supportive of this solution, too. So this is a problem that has some fairly obvious solutions. You just have to break from the ideological mode that we're in now in Congress to come up with them. Again, it's an area that I've worked on and built huge bipartisan support. It's a very, very significant missed opportunity in the country. But your question is, what would I do? I'd never locate my business internationally. I'd never do that.
The largest